Okay, so moving on to point number 4 here, and this is actually where I think again we wanted to try and balance the month in terms of talking about politics and really hard hitting issues. Uh, there's a news story which I just really liked. I really like this. It's based on a report from the National Geographic that talks about how a new map has revealed ships buried below San Francisco, and it highlights that in San Francisco there was such a rush after the gold rush, during the gold rush, to get inland that people just abandoned their ships where they lay, and they were very quickly built on top of. And I think this is a wonderful thing because first of all you can find them, you can go and see them. Some of these actually, I think they've opened up tunnels for access to look at them. But this is actually it's another one of those stories which is a little bit like the Homo sapiens skulls we were talking about before. This is for me a wonderful example of archaeology in action. In this instance, this is an archaeological process happening, and strangely enough not happening even at a particularly speedy rate. It just highlights how quickly archaeology does build up, I think.
I think so. I mean, one of my other particular interests is maritime archaeology, and those of us that do work in that field, I think, are well aware that one of our main resources is actually, certainly in terms of surviving ship hulls, and this is going right back to prehistory into for example, the Dover boat, which is a Bronze Age boat, turned up under a street in Dover during works putting in, I think, telephone cables, if I remember correctly. Mm-hmm. And it was there because it had probably been laid up at the end of its working life and was overtaken by silting and landfill and the build-up of deposits over almost 3,000 years. So obviously in America you have a fascinating piece of social history related to the gold rush, and the suggestion that some of these vessels would be they tie up alongside, and then literally everybody on board from the captain downwards would just decamp into the hills and to stake their claim, and these ships would be left there maybe with a watchman who'd be employed to keep an eye on the thing, and then maybe bits would start to disappear and they'd be used to supply spares and whatever, and then they'd settle on the bottom because they weren't being pumped out, and then landfill comes along, the waterfront's reclaimed, and they're buried, and this is what's happened. And what's unusual in this case, and what's fascinating, and it's a fabulous map that the Maritime Museum has come up with there, is that because it's within recorded history and relatively well recorded history, we know even what the ships are, the names of the ships, where they are, even who own them. So you've got a fascinating piece of social history as well as a fascinating piece of maritime archaeology.
Yeah, it's really, really good, and I also particularly I love the fact that this is an opportunity to reflect upon the fact that in that sense, again, it's not unusual in so much as, for example, I think you were saying the other day in London, there's the Roman waterfront has been.
The Roman
found.
waterfront in London is underneath Lower Thames Street, 100 metres or so away from the current river. In places. We had the Roman Blackfriars vessel turn up in London, and other Roman ships as well.
Yeah. In Edinburgh as well, you have a similar situation there where there've been there are shops and little parts of streets which have been sort of folded into essentially an upward building surge, but then got sort of built over the top of, and
Absolutely.
also parts of bridges. The Paris catacombs, the Parisian catacombs, which
well, again, that was in the news this week, with a couple of teenagers getting lost in the catacombs, having to be rescued by search dogs. Found and rescued by team using search dogs.
What was it? It was the 3 days, didn't they? They spent underground.
Apparently so, yes.
Surrounded by the ancient, well, not the ancient, the historical Parisian dead. They
were stuck in the dead centre of Paris.
Oh no, that's a bad one. But yeah, these things are not as uncommon as we may well think, and actually a local equivalent. It's not quite as dramatic, but a local equivalent for me here in Newcastle is something called the Victoria Tunnel. which was a mining tunnel that was put in to transport coal from the from one side of the city to the other. They didn't want to transport it overland because every part of Newcastle was run by essentially different quarters, different industries. So you would have the guild of shipbuilders, and then the guild of the sailors, and whatever. And every time something passed through their section, they'd want a sample, they'd want a tax. So to avoid that, they built a tunnel under the city, and this is something I quite like, is that this tunnel is it's Victorian, so it's brick lined. It has a history where it was first of all, actually, it's the day it was opened. They ran a little band, a brass band with ladies in frocks, and everything through the tunnel. They all came out the other end covered in soot, but they'd have a grand time doing it down at the docks. But eventually, when it shut down, it became people used to walk. They'd go to the cinema and then walk home. If it was raining, they'd use the tunnel, which is terrifying, I think. But it used to have lights. It became a large air raid shelter in the Second World War. And what's really quite interesting there, in terms of history, is that someone was sent up from London to assess this place because it was wet and damp, and people were complaining about the living conditions. And the comment was, well, the thing is, these people are from Newcastle, and, well, aren't they accustomed to wet, damp conditions? Aren't they all living in mines anyway? That was literally what was said in the report. And then, most recently, a few years ago, they had to reinforce a section of the tunnel that was below the corner of a building project above, and there was slight subsidence, so they had to reinforce it with very strong concrete and what's it called? The metal within the concrete, I forgot what it's called now. Rebar. That's it, rebar.
Rebar,
yeah. And they reckon now that section is so strong that it will be the only bit of Newcastle left after the next glacier comes through. Isn't that fascinating? So, all this stuff, the football grounds, the Georgian centre of the city, where I'm living, it'll all just be scraped away right down to moss and rock, and you'll have this little, archaeologists will find this little sort of 30-metre section of concrete and rebar. So, yeah. Archaeology in action.
That's brilliant. I think the other thing you have to remember about this particular kind of story is where they sit in urban folklore as well, as well as being these hidden secret places that people get into and then publish YouTube videos of as well. But also that they become part of the local folklore, whether it's the tunnel that links the monastery to the nunnery, so the naughty priests and the naughty nuns could get together, or where the abbot buried his treasure before King Henry's commissioners came along, or the one that I'm closest to, which is buried Spitfires in concrete vaults, which you find all over, not just in Myanmar where we were doing our research, but all over Europe. That story crops up in various forms.
Yeah.
But I think what it shows is that often these stories that can have an actual basis in reality. The idea of sort of ghost ships under San Francisco, it sounds like it ought to be part of the folklore, but as we're seeing, it's absolutely true. It's also happened in New York. There was a case of a ship being excavated in New York not that long ago either.
Well, actually, and also it reminds us as well. It's a very prescient reminder that that the urban landscape is just as changing as any other, and I don't mean just that in the literal sense of what we've just been talking about, but specifically in so much as how people agree cities should be used. And I'm thinking in particular, for example, in this instance of Belfast, where up until in archaeological terms relatively recently, they had dry docks fairly deep into the city, and now the main road that runs up to City Hall in Belfast, that was a big dry dock. That's where they were building, I think they were building wooden ships in there. And so it used to be actually that cities, almost like a vicus and a Roman fort, you had the functional military aspect and then a supporting element. Cities used to support industry in a very literal sort of hub-like way, that now we tend to think of cities as being sort of central business district, and then it expands out from that. But it used to be a bit different. And in the case of San Francisco, it landing and then building out from that landing point. You know, it's It also, I think, it also reminds us of that as well. The way that we live has changed.
I think one last point I'd make as well. I think it's a very useful reminder of actually quite how much a landscape can be changed and quite how much ground can be changed relatively quickly in historical and geological time. That huge changes can be made in in the shape of a landscape by human action, even in the early industrial period or even pre-industrial period, relatively quickly if people have got a mind to do it. Going right back to prehistory and looking at something like Silbury Hill. I was driving past Silbury Hill the other week, and it's incredibly. It's a really striking piece of artifact in the landscape and completely artificial, and it's 4,000 years plus.
Yeah. Yeah. So again, just a wonderful story and really highlighting, as you say, that this in particular this relationship between happening, remembering, rediscovering. It's archaeology in action.
Yeah.